Good evening, everybody. This is Toronto Business Journal. We're just doing a test broadcast due to the important developments that have been taking place today and yesterday regarding Justin Trudeau's implementation of the Emergency Act, first time ever used in Canadian history, a relatively recent act to replace the War Measures Act. We're enabling Canadians, people from Ottawa, across Canada and internationally to ask any questions they have about the latest developments taking place in our nation's capital. So today we witnessed in Ottawa the use of pepper spray, various police dressed in riot gear to confront peaceful protesters. There's been a lot of unfortunate misinformation taking place in the so-called mainstream media regarding racism. Most recently, our Prime Minister associated a member of Parliament with aligning themselves with a swastika for vocalizing support for the demonstrators. I can assure you that from my own observations of going on in the freedom protests, that there's been Canadian flags and some occasionally Quebec flags and provincial flags. I have not seen any swastikas at all. There's been only love and positive energy. So this idea that the freedom protest is just a bunch of right-wing racist people carrying Confederate flags is completely propaganda. I experienced no racism there at all. So it's quite disturbing to see the kind of smear campaign that has been taking place against people who are concerned about their rights and freedoms. And in response to that, we have only seen violence being on the other side. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions you have about the ongoing developments of the Canadian freedom protests.
I imagine he's probably telling the truth. Brace yourself. I'm gonna get another view. I just really don't want to get shot by a rubber bullet. Like that's like not really what I want to do right now. Is it too cold? It is quite cold, man, but it's not too cold.
We're currently listening to, I believe it's Zot's coverage of who's a famous live streamer. Zot, definitely recommend his channel for live streaming. So once again, we are providing live question and answer for anybody who wants to ask any questions about the current developments taking place in our nation's capital.
So I don't know how we made progress here. Thank you for the donation. I honestly did not see what you said. I'm sorry. They moved back. I'm taking up the spot above again.
Once again, this is Toronto Business Journal. We're just doing a test live stream as we endeavor to keep on top of the latest developments going on with the Freedom Convoy. Right now, I'm observing Bank Street. There's a lot of police that's around in that area with a big crowd of people with Canadian flags. Seems to be growing from this morning.
It looks like they're open, but I just checked over there. I don't know.
They are gathered at Spark Street and Bank Street in downtown Ottawa. A big crowd with a line of police.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming back. 7,300. Get those likes, get those subscribes. You haven't. I definitely will be here for a couple more hours. This is not calming down too much.
So apparently, in terms of what we've been keeping track of, the Trudeau government has brought in a variety of different police forces from right across Canada to confront very peaceful protesters. The truckers have been seem to be pretty much cleared out, and now we're left with pedestrians. And theoretically, at least on our constitutional system of government, pedestrians are more than welcome as long as they're peaceful and respectful and not breaking any criminal laws to be there where they are, yet they're being confronted with a variety of different police force, most notably that include the Sûreté du Québec, dressed in green in riot gear today, as well as I reportedly, there was a York region there yesterday, RCMP, I believe there was some City of Ottawa backup, and all this is for a completely peaceful protest where there's people have not been engaged in any sort of violence. It's been completely peaceful. And this, again, whatever you've been hearing on the CBC and these very so-called mainstream outlets, I don't advise you listen to them. If you want to get the real story, I advise to check out the live streamers. And Fox has sought to give relatively honest coverage if you're looking for mainstream coverage from an American perspective. Once again, this is a test stream.
I gotta check. It looks like the cops are just straight up retreating back behind the barricade.
Now reports of cops retreating.
Maybe a shift change. This is why you need a First and Second Amendment, everyone.
So I can report my experience of the Freedom Convoy again. This is a test stream of Toronto Business Journal. We are in a sort of a semi-simulcasting of audio that we're getting in from Zot's live stream. Again, we're providing commentary from anybody who wants to ask questions about what's going on in Ottawa.
Oh, they're all going back? They're all going back? Hello?
So what we're seeing today is definitely a historic moment in terms of Canadian history when we see the type of tactics that we normally witnessed in an authoritarian regime being used against very peaceful protests, which is definitely undermining our image internationally as a peaceful country focused on the rule of law when we have the an authoritarian system confronting peaceful protesters. So once again, this is a test live stream of Toronto Business Journal as we are providing a semi-simulcasting of coverage taking place by various live streamers in Ottawa who are covering the freedom protest in our nation's capital. This is just a live stream test that we're doing to provide anybody who wants to ask any questions across Ottawa, Canada, internationally, of what's going on in our nation's capital. in terms of the standpoint of the mainstream media, with the exception of Fox in the United States, have attempted to demonize the protesters as violent, Confederate flag, and, not respecting the rule of law, and all this smear campaign against them is quite inconsistent with my experience of the freedom protests.
Because they don't need to push us from there. There's a barricade. I don't know.
And yesterday was particularly a dark moment when we had horses, mounted police. I believe they might have been RCMP mounted police, trampling peaceful protesters, including reportedly an elderly woman who might have been physically challenged. But in Ottawa right now, as we speak, we're having a growing group of Canadians, all peaceful, waving Canadian flags, no swastikas whatsoever, wanting to reclaim their street from what it seems to be an attempt to overturn the rule of law by the Trudeau government and replace our system of government with a authoritarian/totalitarian government. Again, a couple of years ago, if anybody forecasted what we're seeing yesterday and today, they would have been labeled as some sort of conspiracy theorist. But as we see, sometimes theories can turn into what actually happens, an actual fact. And what we're seeing here is peaceful protesters who are seeking to give voice to their frustration at a government which does not seem to be too anxious at trying to include their views and represent their views as part of the Canadian diversity that they're supposed to represent, seeking to repress them rather than to listen to their voices. So again, at Toronto Business Journal, we are a not-for-profit initiative designed to provide an alternative perspective to the often repressive media coverage, which has sought to undermine free speech and undermine what's actually taking place with respect to the protests. And again, the true heroes I wanted to commend out there are these live streamers, which are providing people from Ottawa, people from across the country, and internationally a window on what is going on in actuality, rather than the type of propaganda that we see being leveled and being proselytized through CBC, which used to be, in my view, a very commendable broadcaster, which has been apparently turned into a sort of Soviet-style, old Soviet regime-style instrument of propaganda in the manner of Pravda. So we're keeping at Toronto Business Journal, we're keeping track of what's going on with respect to the protests. We still see a strong group of Canadians, all peaceful, singing the national anthem, waving the Canadian flags. We're watching the protest at around Bank Street and Sparks, just south of Wellington, where there is a group of police acting very much similar to the stormtroopers and the old Stasi, which have gathered with the Canadians who are trying to reclaim their streets as their right to be there. They are not engaged in any criminal activity. They are just pedestrians walking around, and they are being confronted with stormtrooper-style police. Again, this is if you just joined us, This is the test coverage of Toronto Business Journal. We are testing our live stream feed. And at the same time, we welcome anybody from Ottawa, across Canada, internationally, who wants to ask any questions concerning the ongoing freedom protest in Ottawa, which seems to be spreading in different parts of Canada. I saw seemed to have been a march today in Toronto, and there seems to be certain activity taking place in Quebec City as well.
Yeah, I don't really know what's going to be happening. Sitting around the world is watching. We appreciate all of your comments and everything. Like, if you have, definitely like.
What you do online with GoDaddy. The right domain's waiting. Snag it and create a stunning web.
This is, once again, if you've just joined us, we're doing a test live coverage, live stream, Toronto Business Journal live stream on the ongoing protest in Ottawa, which has been a peaceful one. Again, if you might have seen the coverage in the so-called mainstream media, they've attempted to smear the campaign as being racist, swastika carrying, unruly, and the only unruliness we've seen so far is the use of pepper spray, the setting up of sonic booms by the police. All the illegality, so to speak, that we've seen so far has been on the side of the Trudeau regime, so to speak, that has been engaged in various abuses of power and authority to people who are simply seeking to be heard and seeking to gain representation that they're being denied as the Trudeau government seeks to push its narrative about the pandemic. Again, if you just joined us, we're doing test coverage. Toronto Business Journal, this is simply a test as we set up our efforts to cover the freedom protests in Ottawa, as I mentioned before. For those of you just joining who have not seen any live streaming coverage, the protests have been peaceful. People have been waving Canadian flags, not swastikas, as our Prime Minister has sought to portray them as doing. We're doing test coverage so that we can make a constructive contribution to investigative journalism and objective coverage of events as they unfold regarding the historic use of power against peaceful protesters in Canada. Again, this is Toronto Business Journal. We are just right now I am watching events as they unfold in Bank Street and Spark Street, which is downtown Ottawa and a very attractive part of the city, not far from Parliament Hill. If we can, there's been a lot of activity going on today. Yesterday, we saw the use of unconstitutional authority under the Emergency Act enacted by the Trudeau government before even the debate in the House of Commons. We saw the trampling of peaceful protesters. We saw the importation of Sûreté to Quebec in paramilitary gear. All this, again, is tactics which, as Canadians, we're not used to being peaceful. The protesters, I witnessed, greeted the stormtrooper-style police with flowers and love and positive messages, urging them to be on the right side of history. In response to that, the police trampled on protesters and disrespected their constitutional rights as Canadian citizens in the protest. The efforts of the truck convoy, I observed them to be feeding the homeless, cleaning up to themselves, maintaining, trying to be responsible in the city as far with respect to littering. With respect, there's been, unlike we have seen in the United States, there's been no looting, no sort of criminal activity like that. Peaceful people, and in response to that, we have seen only violence on the side of the Trudeau government and its authoritarian-style police. And now we're in downtown Ottawa. We are now hearing and witnessing fireworks. I guess some of the protesters are putting up fireworks. There was some people playing music early in the day. There's been nothing but positive energy during the protest, which has continued today, even in the face of the violence that has been greeted them. Again, this is our test feed coverage of Toronto Business Journal as we attempt to provide independent coverage and provide for in our test coverage today. Anybody who wants to ask any questions concerning what's going on in Ottawa, please feel free to use the chat box for that. We are just doing a test coverage right now of our coverage of what's going on in Ottawa with the freedom protests. And right now, around Bank in Ottawa, there's been some fireworks going on as the protesters which have gathered there have continued to be confronted with stormtroopers, for lack of a better word. People, again, the crowd has seems to have been walked from Bank Street. As far as I'm aware, there are reports of checkpoints being set up right around the Centertown area, which is the main area that's connected to downtown Ottawa. There's been checkpoints set up as very much consistent with what people have described to be the type of checkpoint system that would greet people in a so-called New World Order. We're starting to see that being erected to peaceful protesters. There's no looting going on. There's no criminal activity that I have experienced and observed. No reports of that. Only violent display of power and authority on the side of the Trudeau regime, so to speak. The crowd is gathered witnessing a very historic event. Again, this is live stream coverage, a play-by-play, so to speak, of what's taking place in downtown Ottawa, around the Spark Street, Slater Street, and Bank Street in downtown Ottawa. Crowds are gathered with Canadian flags. Earlier today, there was definitely some singing going on. There was some First Nations people supporting the morale of the crowd with drumming. The crowd has been very diverse. This idea that there's white supremacists there trying to overthrow the government is complete nonsense. Very diverse people. I've been at the Freedom Convoy seeking to reclaim their constitutional rights against the efforts of the Trudeau government to install itself as an authoritarian style dictatorship that can seize bank accounts and declare people as enemies of the state based on the contrived pretexts that they dream up that are reinforced by state-controlled media like the CBC and various private broadcasters, which are in tandem with their rhetoric. Again, this is the independent coverage of the Toronto Business Journal, seeking to provide objective coverage of the events as they unfold in downtown Ottawa this evening at 8:34 p.m. A peaceful crowd has gathered and has been building up since earlier this morning of Canadians who are confused about what is taking place. As Canadians, we are known to be peaceful, embrace values of having a society of tranquility, a society where we don't have stormtroopers guarding our parliament. Again, there's been no violence that has been necessitated. There are thousands of police that have been descended in downtown Ottawa. Apparently, police force I witnessed from Sûreté Québec, not only the Sûreté Québec from the neighboring Quebec and the RCMP, but I've witnessed Durham police. Apparently, there's Toronto police from all across Canada. There's been police forces assembled as if there's some sort of mob, violent insurrection activity going on. Again, this type of the only thing I can explain why these police have been brought in is not because there's actual violence or insurrection or criminal activity going on. It's for the cameras of the CBC, CTV, and any other sort of propagandists to justify their sort of emergency act by showing images of these police and then to create a narrative around these police to justify the use of emergency act, even though the images, while at the same time censoring images that show peaceful protesters waving the Canadian flag. Again, this excessive police presence appears to be part of a propaganda campaign that it can be used by various media to give the impression to Canadians that there is violence taking place. If you want to see what's actually taking place in Ottawa, I advise live streamers like the War Campaign, like Zoot, like a variety of other live streamers out there who are actually showing images as they happen in Ottawa that are unfiltered by the so-called mainstream media. The only mainstream media, again, which I've observed to try to give a voice to the oppressed in this environment, the oppressed Canadians, has been from the United States. Fox seems to have been trying to give an objective perspective on what's going on. But again, there's been too much of an effort to try to label this group as so-called right-wing extremists. They are not right-wing extremists. These people, a lot of them are moms, kids, soccer moms, as they call them in the States. People who are everyday people who are concerned, who don't normally participate in activist protests. People who are everyday so-called ordinary Canadians, as the NDP used to call them, who are perplexed and shocked at the presence of thousands of stormtrooper style cops going around the place, creating artificial checkpoints to legitimate some propaganda effort. So again, this is our test live stream coverage of Toronto Business Journal as we seek to provide alternative commentary to what you might hear on the so-called mainstream media.
Yo, is it possible for me to get up there? Oh! Here, someone's gonna
Protect the things that matter. Home insurance welcome.
Hey, welcome. You got it? Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I just don't know where it is. Do you have a number?
Again, this is, we're doing just test commentary of what's going on in the live stream. Again, if you wanted to see actual events taking place in Ottawa, Zoot is a very good place to check out. And there are also other variety of great live streamers. We are just attempting to provide sort of a parallel commentary on what's going on with respect to the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. Again, we're covering in Ottawa. We're broadcasting from Ottawa, 8:39 p.m. right now in Ottawa, in our nation's capital. Again, crowds gathered in as we check out on our monitor downtown Ottawa around Sparks and Slater and Bank Street, which are part of the downtown Ottawa. People are in Canadian flags waving, Quebec flags again, absolutely no swastika, people all in positive energy, no violence, no civil unrest to justify the use of stormtrooper style police in Ottawa. Again, this is test live stream coverage. We're just doing a test to provide viewers out there, Canadians and people from internationally, commentary and what's going on in downtown Ottawa. Again, this idea that there's racism taking place. All these are a bunch of right-wing, racist, swastika-carrying extremists. Again, it's a part of a propaganda smear campaign. The people have been law-abiding. They represent diversity, people of all backgrounds, people of nothing but positive group energy, music. I observe in downtown Ottawa, people in a celebratory fashion, and in response to that, we saw efforts by the police to respond with pure violence. Again, I mentioned the use of mounted police to trample citizens, the use of stormtrooper style Sûreté de Québec in paramilitary uniforms I observed as well. I don't know what Sûreté Québec business is in Ontario. Again, this is a peaceful demonstration. It can be more than handled by some, OPP as well as RCMP as they direct. But this bringing in of apparently thousands of police from across Canada. Notably, I saw Durham, which is a neighboring in Toronto, Quebec, Sûreté de Québec. All these police seem to be assembled specifically because of their provocative their penchants for provocative. The police in Ottawa, before this emergency act, I observed them being cordial to demonstrators. There's only a couple of incidents which I saw where police were using excessive force or questionable force, namely the stealing of firewood, the stealing of gas by the truckers, which apparently was returned in a diluted state. I saw some apparently homeless people. One particular homeless person was their face was in the ground, surrounded by 6 cops, which I don't think you need 6 cops to, redress whatever law enforcement you're using against a homeless person who barely has enough energy to do anything because they are homeless, and oftentimes a lot of these homeless people don't have any sufficient food. So that was quite shocking. But aside from that, the truckers expressed relative amicable relations with the police. So it seems that this Emergency Act was an attempt to undercut the positive relations that most police have cultivated with truckers in general, to engage in strong hand authoritarian tactics. Again, all these truckers, all this mess could have been avoided if our prime minister acting like a prime minister, engaged in less personalized politics and made an effort as a prime minister, to be magnanimous, to at least listen. He doesn't have to agree with the truckers, but at least give them an opportunity to speak their mind and to demonstrate leadership, and then demonstrate that as prime minister, you are head of a democratic government, which is interested in including a diversity of perspective, even those that you may not agree with. But instead, we see, instead of simply the prime minister making an effort, as premiers have had, some premiers have had across Canada, at listening and responding accordingly and trying to balance between a diversity of perspectives as a democratic government. We have seen the Trudeau government resort to tactics of oppression rather than listening to marginalized voices. They've sought to oppress them, and this is inconsistent with democracy. The measure of a democracy, from my understanding, is the ability of government to represent minority rights. The more advanced a democracy is the more advanced it represents minority, whether they're First Nations, LGBTQ, visible minorities, truckers, whatever they may be. There needs to be a democratic government needs to make an effort to be inclusive. That's my understanding what government is about. But instead of making an effort of being inclusive, we have a government which was responding to protesters who are peaceful with violence. Now, I would understand if the prime minister was confronted with a violent demonstrations like what we saw in the United States with Portland, where we saw the use of all kinds of hideous violence. Then in that particular situation, that may be a need to, if that was going on in Ottawa, if there was looting, if there was mayhem, destruction, like what we saw in Portland, then I think that Canadians would appreciate the need for all these police coming in from all over the place to enforce the rule of law. But when you have a peaceful protest, when you have protesters going out of their way to be respectful and responsible, and I just seem to be frustrated and wanting to listen to, when you attempt to use pure force and brutality against them, in my view, you're not legitimating yourself as a democratic government. You are presenting yourself as not a government of a democracy, but of a government of an authoritarian system dedicated to enforcing one particular ideology, narrative, or perspective. That to me is what is the context of tyranny. It's a context of oppression. And when the our prime minister talks about, he's on the side of the majority, whether you're on the side of the majority or not, does not give you the authority in the democratic constitutional system to then use force to quell people engaged in peaceful acts of civil disobedience against an attempt to marginalize their voices. And when you respond to that, not only with violence coupled with a smear campaign, which is inconsistent with the actual facts, when you attempt to label them as a swastika carrying racists, demagogues, bent on violence, when that's completely inconsistent with the facts, you lose the legitimacy of yourself as a responsible government. You put yourself in a position where you're a government which is acting in an authoritarian manner, acting consistent with totalitarian regimes, and that technique of smearing your opposition is a technique which has been used multiple times before throughout history in the efforts of dictatorial governments to use oppressive authorities against minorities and other groups which it opposes ideologically.
You've got a lot of choice words, my friend. Do you want to say a few words for 6,000 people?
I'd like to say that I wish I still lived in the fucking Canada I fucking grew up in as a kid, man. These guys are holding the line fucking when all Canadians should actually be here. And they should be on our fucking side, not Justin Trudeau.
Thank you so much.
So thanks. A shout out goes to Shane, who's joining us again. We need to we commend all the live streamers out there, like Zot and like War Campaign and all the other live streamers out there who have been giving voice to oppressed. Again, this is not a right-wing movement that's taking place. It's a movement of Canadians of all backgrounds, ideologically, ethnically, and all perspective. And it's quite disturbing how these people have been marginalized. Again, this is test coverage of Toronto Business Journal. We're providing color commentary, so to speak, of what we see going on in the various live streams that have been sort of taking place. Again, the police have erected up a fence at Spark Street and Bank Street to keep out pedestrians who are engaged in peaceful walking about. They're not engaged in any violence. The closing of the street to pedestrians is a completely violation of constitutional law. It's a violation of their mobility rights as Canadians. This is a violation. So this is the type of tactics we see going here, which is that of an authoritarian government. And as Canadians, it is vital at this moment in history for people to make themselves aware of what's going on. Again, I find it compelled to come here today because as someone who is Black, who has gone to the protest myself, I can tell you as a Black Canadian and as a Canadian in general that the efforts to label the Freedom Convoy as racist, and particularly as well as the protesters gathered today, is a smear campaign. They are not swastika carrying. I've only seen purely Canadian flags with some flags of different provinces, notably Nova Scotia and British Columbia and Quebec, and with a couple of American flags now and then, but definitely no swastikas. And no, I've not personally observed any Confederate flag except for one apparent agent provocateur, which seems to have been planted and inserted there by the establishment to make trouble and to provide for a photo opportunity for the mainstream media.
Who made a choice to come in,
yeah, and they know what they're doing. You look in their eye, they know.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming out. Have a good one.
Again, this is live coverage of Toronto Business Journal. This is test coverage, color commentary of what's going on in downtown Ottawa with respect to the Freedom Convoy. Crowds gathered around Spark Street and Bank Street. A fence has been erected against the mobility of Canadians. Again, this is a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that guarantee mobility rights. There's no violence. There is no provocation that took place to elicit the barricading of the area by the stormtrooper-style police. This is nothing less than what you might see in China, with respect to, except that I saw one Chinese government official saying that when they use this tactics, it's been against violent confrontations in Hong Kong, and that this is a completely peaceful. They are trying to, I guess, suggest Chinese government that they would not use these strong hand tactics. I have not been in Hong Kong, so I cannot speak to the use of what the Chinese government does, but this has been their apparently commentary on incidents. So when you have governments that have been accused before of authoritarian tactics criticizing what's going on in Canada, we have definitely stooped a very low point in our history for a society which has prided itself on leadership and setting a role model, and now we have a descent in terms of authoritarianism by the Trudeau regime, coupled with smear campaign, smear tactics used against peaceful protesters to demonize them, and propaganda techniques. All these techniques that we're seeing before us are used by authoritarian, totalitarian regimes. Again, we're doing a live stream color commentary of the events taking place in Ottawa with respect to the freedom protest. We're going to be taking a break, and we'll attempt to try another test live stream, perhaps within the next 10-15 minutes. Please subscribe to this channel if you want to keep track of our color commentary. We also have a planned live stream coming up Monday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that will be giving a presentation about how to self-publish books. If you're an author and are seeking to self-publish books, this is a free opportunity to get information on how you can go about having a self-publishing a book and transforming your book into a prospective bookseller. So prospective bestseller. So if you're interested, if you're an author out there interested in checking out our live stream on this coming Monday, where we talk about books, you're invited to join us this coming Monday. In the meantime, we'll be ending this live stream as we test our live stream capabilities. Thank you very much, and we might try to join you back in the next 10 or 15 minutes potentially. Thank you to everybody who took the time to listen to our test live stream coverage in which we are providing color commentary on the crazy, for lack of a better word, events taking place in Ottawa with respect to the peaceful protesters and the cordoning off of streets by stormtrooper-style police. We'll be joining our commentary in the next 10, 15 minutes in terms of the next live stream. Thank you to everybody listening, and subscribe if you want to keep track of future videos.